Good evening. Today we are here to discuss the business case study, and I myself is Muhammad. I have my teammates, my group mates, Kate, Taya, Gil, Avisha, April, and Rona. So let's start this case, what this case is about, and how we're gonna do this presentation. So we'll be discussing an important legal case in trade finance that highlights the role and responsibilities of banks in of credit transactions. And this particular case, examines a fraud incident where confirming bank paid $5 million each on 45 documents. And the key legal issue here is whether the bank held liable for the negligence when it followed the standard banking procedure, or it should not be held for that particular act. And this case is significant because it impacts how the banks and businesses handle international trade transactions and ensuring legal certainty and financial security. So our project goals are as follows: to analyze the liability of conforming banks in trade finance. Another one is to evaluate the legal standards banks must follow. A bank should follow the legal standards. And another one is to understand the court's reasoning in this case. What is the court's reasoning and what are the reasons behind the judgments and everything. Uh, if we move to next one, then examine the role of financial intermediaries in such transactions. That what are the roles of those financial intermediaries. And finally, to highlight the key takeaways that affect global trade and banking regulations. So these are our key goals, and these are the project goals that we are having. And this case study, we aim to provide valuable insight into how legal principles protect both banks and businesses and ensuring fair and transparent financial transactions. And now I would like to pass it to my teammate, Chin and
Hello everyone, I'm Jin, and I will presenting the background and key fact of Indica versus Continental Illinois National Bank. Indica is a Guatemalan government agency responsible for buying food for the country. In 1980, Indica agreed to purchased 6,000 metric tons of black beans from a U.S. trading company called Rumex for $5 million. Rumex was owned by Deborah Bell, and her attorney, Robert Trucker, was also involved on seller's side. To pay for the beans, Indica used a letter of credit. Indica's bank in Guatemala issued the letter of credit, and Continental Illinois Bank in Chicago confirmed it, meaning Continental guaranteed payment to the sellers once the proper shipping documents were provided. Bell and Trucker were named as beneficiaries of this letter of credit, so they would receive funds when the required documents were presented. The fraud unfolded when the sellers presented their shipping documents of Continental to claim payments. The bank noticed the documents did not meet the letter of credit's requirements. Some important paper was missing or incorrect. Bell took the documents back and quickly returned the same day with revised documents that looked more compliant. Continental still had doubt. The next business day, the bank tried to verify the shipment by contacting the shipping company, but they could not get confirmation that the beans were actually shipped. Despite not being able to confirm the shipment, Continental decided to trust the document and went ahead with the payment. On Tuesday, the bank honored the letter of credit and paid out the $5 million to Bell and Trucker. It soon became clear that the entire transaction was fraudulent. Indica never received any black beans. All of the shipping documents turned out to be forgeries. Deborah Bell, Robert Trucker, and another accomplice had faked the paperwork to steal the money. Indica lost the $5 million and got nothing in return. In the aftermath, Bell and Tracker were caught and convicted of fraud. Indica also sued Continental Illinois Bank to hold it responsible for paying on those fraudulent documents. In summary, this case highlights how a letter of credit can be abused through fraud. Indica paid a huge sum of goods that never existed, and the legal battle that followed was about who should bear that loss. Next, April and our other group members will discuss how the courts handled this case and what it means for the law.
Thank you, Jean, for walking us through the background of the case. Understanding the facts really helps frame the legal issue clearly. The central legal issue here is, can a confirming bank be held liable in tort or negligence to a buyer when documents appear to comply with the letter of credit but later found to be fake? The court used the UCP 600, a global set of rules for letter of credit transactions. So two important principles were applied. The first one is the autonomy principle, which means the bank deals only with documents, not the actual goods or services. The second is the doctrine of strict compliance. So meaning that the bank must pay if the documents appear to match the credit terms, even if the goods are never delivered. So now that we've looked at the issue and the rules applied by the court, let's dive into how those rules were applied in the specific circumstances of this case. So I'll pass it over to Rona, who will explain the first part of the court's application of the law.
So how did the court apply these rules to the facts? So in this part, the court looked at what role the bank played in the transaction. The bank did process the letter of credit, which were connected to a fraudulent scheme. However, the court found that the bank wasn't directly involved in the fraud itself. The bank was just following its usual procedure and wasn't required to investigate or detect fraud beyond what the law required. So basically, since the bank didn't participate in the fraud, it wasn't held responsible for it. Why did the court take this position on the bank's rule? The court explained that banks act as financial intermediaries. That means their job is to process transactions, not to investigate them. Expecting banks to look for fraud in every transaction would put too much pressure on them and could disrupt the entire financial system. So, because the bank was just doing its normal job and wasn't legally responsible for checking for fraud, the court didn't hold it accountable for what third parties did. So I'll pass the next presentation for Heath.
Thank you, Rana. So let's talk about how does this case affect international banking or a letter of credit law. So this case had a big impact on how banks handle letter of credit. So first of all, it confirmed that the banks only look at the documents, not the actual goods. This called the independency principle. Secondly, it made a clear that the bank can only refuse payment if the fraud is clearly proven. And following by, it sets the legal example for the future trade finance cases. And also, it gave a more clarity and trust in international trade. And now you can see it's often taught in schools to explain a letter of credit rules and a banking responsibility. So overall, the case helped make international banking rule more clear and more reliable. I'll pass the next slide to Kavisha for the more clear details.
Thank you, Head. I'm Kavisha. I am going to talk about the similar cases that have been recorded about the letter of credit incidents. Uh, this case study is based on Canada, which happened in between Angelica Whiteweather Limited and the Nova Scotia Bank. In this case, the Supreme Court of Canada also emphasized the autonomy principle of the letter of credit. The court ruled the banks must honor the terms of the credits based on strictly on documents presented, even if there is a risk of fraud. So just like that, in the Indica case, the court found that the bank was not liable because it acted within its roles and didn't deal with directly with the actual goods. So this comparison shows a consistent global approach of letter of credit law. It reinforces the message that buyers need to protect themselves through the due diligence, contract terms, and risk mitigation tools like inspection certifications. Moreover, it also highlights how important it is to clarify and define responsibilities in international contracts, especially in high value transactions. And this is the visual summary IRAC. The issue was, can confirming bank must be held liable for negligence when paying on forged documents? The rule associated with this was UCP 600, and bank deal with the documents, not with actual goods. And confirming banks owe a duty only to the only to the issuing bank. The application case was the bank followed the standardized process under the UCP 600, and it checked the documents but did not confirm the goods, the actual shipment, and fraud occurred, but the bank was not directly involved, so bank is not liable. The conclusion was the court ruled that the bank is not liable and for confirming the actual shipment. And the final outcome was the banks should not expected to investigate the fraud beyond their documentation check duties. And this is the visual summary of the flowchart. You can refer the flowchart to get more simplified understanding what have been occurred so far in this case study. So I would like to invite Tahia to conclude this presentation.
Thank you, Kavisha. My name is Tahia, and I'm going to talk about the conclusion of this case. So the entire case, in conclusion, this case just highlights the importance of understanding the limited liability of banks under the letter of credits law. And despite the confirming bank's involvement, it was really not held liable for the transaction's failure. As a result, Indica suffered a significant loss. It suffered a huge financial loss, most importantly, and in terms of all the goods that was received. The court's decision reinforces the idea that banks operate within strict legal boundaries in trade finances, and they're not responsible for the issues that's beyond their confirmation duties. So, just all in all, this case serves as a huge reminder for businesses to thoroughly assess risks when dealing with international trade and financial instruments like letter of credit law.
This is the references and the resources we referred to make this presentation. So that's all for the day. Thank you so much and have a good day.